This episode is sponsored by the Cornell S.E. Johnson College of Business. The Cornell Executive MBA Americas program is designed for goal achievers from any industry. The program works by advancing your career without interruption, by providing global perspectives and intimate classroom settings, and by challenging, informing, connecting, and propelling you. Achieve your goals with the Cornell Executive MBA Americas program on the weekend and close to home. Search Cornell EMBA Americas in my city today.
Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Maricella Herrera and Megan Oliver.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ellevate podcast. I'm Maricella Herrera, the CEO of Ellevate Network, here with my co-host, Megan Oliver.
Hi.
How's it going, Megan?
Going well. It's all hands on deck right now. We're all just gearing up for Mobilize Women at this point.
Yeah, so Mobilize Women, our annual summit is next week, y'all. It's going to be great and exciting. This is the 7th year we've done it, or I guess this is the 7th year we are doing it. And I'm excited. Mobilize Women is one of my favorite things to work on. And yes, it can get hectic, but I kind of like hectic. We're going to be talking and covering some really cool topics, including the caregiving crisis and gender equity and climate change, making workplaces more human, the personal as political as business. So, things we don't necessarily talk about in our day to day, but that are all important topics if we want to make the world a better place.
Love that. Yeah. And in case you're curious, the next two guests that we'll be doing on the podcast, today's and next week's, just like last week, are both Mobilize Women guests. So you'll get kind of like a little teaser of what to expect from Mobilize Women.
Yeah, and they're fantastic. So I cannot wait for you all to get to know them. But first, and because Mobilize Women takes up so much of our time, but it is not the only thing we do. Tell us what's going on this week at Ellevate.
This week at Ellevate, we've got some fun stuff happening. Our Ellevate Roundtable is going to be all about checking in on career goals and progress. That is on Thursday. So excited about that. I think that's a really good time of the year to be checking in on your goals and progress because we're, right at the halfway mark.
Mhm.
So that'll be fun. Well, I guess the halfway mark is beginning of July. But regardless, we're at the 6th month. Look, math has never been my strong
Look,
suit.
it
We know
still
that.
sounds like most of the year is gone. So
Yeah,
let's not go there. Let's keep going.
a lot of the year. We're way too far into 2023 for my liking. That's weird. We don't have any community circles coming up in the next week. It's just kind of one of those weird weeks where we just happen to not have any. But don't worry, there are plenty coming up soon. And then we do have some in-person events. Our Fairfield Westchester chapter is hosting a cocktails and conversation at Mexico in Stamford. That's on Wednesday, so today. Our DFW chapter, that's me now, is hosting their DFW monthly happy hour also today, Wednesday. Our Los Angeles chapter is hosting a happy hour at Serendipity Labs on Thursday, so tomorrow. Toronto is hosting a Career Express interviewing for success also on Thursday. Our Northern New Jersey chapter is hosting their in-person monthly coffee and conversations, the Bookhouse Do Yourself a Favor on Friday, and then of course next Tuesday in New York City. If you are in New York City, you won't want to miss this. It's our Mobilize Women Awards and cocktail reception.
Yeah, I'm excited about that event. It is the day before Mobilize Women, so the night before, are going to be getting together at the Prince George Ballroom. So, this very swanky, lovely space where we're going to have cocktails, appetizers, yummy food. And incredible people. We have 3 awards that we're giving out that night. Lifetime Achievement Award, which we're giving to Janet Hansen, who is the founder of 85 Broads, now Ellevate. So she created this community back in the 90s. And fun fact, she is the person that hired me 12, long time ago. So it's very exciting to be able to recognize her because of all the work and passion she's put into advancing women and creating spaces where we can get together. So we're doing that Lifetime Achievement Award. We are doing our International Women of Change Award, which we had taken a pause during COVID from giving that award out. And this year we're giving it to Jamila Jamil, actress, advocate, and total incredible, fantastic badass who's doing lots of things to make sure that women feel comfortable in their own skin and that we can all show up as who we are. So, very excited about giving her that award. And our first ever History Maker Award. We celebrate history makers in this podcast every single week. And we thought, you know what? This is something we want to do more of, and this is something that we want to celebrate even more. And this year, we're giving our inaugural History Maker Award to Vice President Rochelle Montoya, who is the first woman elected executive official of the Navajo Nation. So, lots of great things. And with those awards also come really great people who will be presenting them with the awards. So, you don't want to miss it. I promise you, it's going to be a night to remember.
Yeah. And speaking of Rochelle, she should be. I already interviewed her. I'm so excited. She will be the history maker on the History Makers series this week. So if you want to know a little bit more about her, tune in there.
Love it. And I think we can just go into it, right? Um,
Yeah, let's do it. Do you want to introduce who you're talking to this week?
Yeah, because I really want you all to meet her. Her name is Sadé Dozan. She's the Chief Operations and Development Officer at Caring Across Generations. She she's really great. She believes in the power of collected voices to shift culture and policies surrounding under-resourced communities and marginalized groups that are the ones that usually end up taking care of their loved ones. So, can we create a world where there's sustainable care for all? That is what her passion is. She has been dedicated to secure funds and build nonprofit development and creating health and community initiatives from the moment she started her career. So, she's someone that I think you'll enjoy meeting. We have a great conversation around caregiving, about around the caregiving crisis, about changing the conversation around that. So you'll get a sneak peek into what we'll be talking about at Mobilize Women.
Indeed. I can't wait.
So hope you enjoy my conversation with Sade. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today with Sadé Dozan. Sade, how are you?
I am fantastic. I am excited about the spring and really looking forward to everything these next couple of months have in store.
So I'm very excited to be talking to Sade today because Sade, you are going to join us in about a month as one of our speakers for Mobilize Women Summit.
Hmm.
So for everyone who's heard me on this podcast talk about Mobilize Women, it is my baby. So very excited that you're going to be there to talk to us about the caregiving crisis and what's going on in that space.
Hmm.
But just so we go, to get started, to get our audience familiar with the work you do, can you tell me a little bit about your background and the work you're doing today?
Yeah. So I started out in nonprofit organizing work. I did a lot of community grassroots work. And I found that what always works for me is to find values aligned organizations that I feel super passionate and invested about. I think that we have so much time spent in our working age that it's really important that, the 40, 50, sometimes 60 years we spend working is
Mm.
focused on things that we feel really passionate about. So I am a chief of operations and development at Caring Across Generations, which is a national organization that is shifting how care is valued in this country. It connects to me in a lot of different ways, particularly because I am a family caregiver, which means I support my family members, specifically my mother and my father, as well as my young daughter who turns 5 next month. So Caring
Mhm.
Cross embodies who I am, and it's working to shift policy systems that support family caregivers and caregivers like me. So it's amazing.
I love it. I love it. You've been in the caregiving space for a while now.
Yeah, I have been a caregiver. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, let's see. So 2017, my 2018, my daughter was born, and 2018 was the same year that I became a caregiver. And then I found Caring Across, or Caring Cross found me in 2019. So I've been working formally here since 2020, so a couple of years.
And your journey, because I know I've read a little bit about it. You had your daughter, but then you also were having to take care of your mother, right?
Yeah, about 6 months. My daughter was 6 months old. We were like, oh, okay, this is going to be great. I found out I was pregnant. I was not expecting it. I cannot say I was ready. I was just like, let's figure it
Does
out.
anyone ever?
Yeah, I don't know if that's, I don't know. I feel like folks that say they're ready, I'm like, oh man, teach me your lesson. And my mom was a big part of that excitement and that joy. And the idea was that she would kind of help take care of my daughter while, while I had to go back to work. And then we were making it work for about 6 months or so. But my daughter was like right around her half year of life. My mom had a pretty serious heart attack,
Mhm.
and like overnight, I became kind of everything. I had to become a caregiver. I had to operate in a world where I didn't have childcare, like all in the same kind of 5 minute span. My entire
Yeah.
world shifted. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, you had to care for your daughter and your mother. So that's I think when we hear caregiver, and maybe I'm wrong, but
Hmm.
at many points, I think a lot of the conversation, and it's changing maybe, but it was always kind of tied to child care
Hmm.
without necessarily thinking, we many of us are in this sandwich generation.
Yeah, I think that we often, especially for folks that are kind of, you know, they have grown up with families who kind of care for family members, and you get the
Mhm.
norms of kind of the cultural norms of like, oh, this is just what you do. You show up for family, and this is how you
Yep.
kind of operate. So I think that a lot of us witness care and actively participate in caregiving without really thinking about it.
Yes.
The grocery runs that you do, or supporting a family member who needs to go to the bathroom, or thinking about being a part of the care team and taking them to the doctor's appointments. Like all of that is care. And we do it so often, but we just don't realize it. So, yeah, there are millions of caregivers actively supporting their loved ones, both their chosen and their blood family. Yeah.
And and you mentioned the cultural norms, and I think it's true. I mean, for certain groups, probably more than others.
Yeah, especially I'm a Black Latina. I My mother is Puerto Rican, my dad is Black, and I grew up with a lot of the cultural norms that I feel like often show up in brown communities.
Mhm.
This idea of you take care of your own, lots of inherited values that focused on family being the core of your identity.
Yep.
And I go back and forth and really struggle with that a lot, because I think that on one hand, it's beautiful. There's a narrative that is really strong in brown communities about togetherness and family and kind of the unit of one. And on the other hand, it can feel kind of isolating, right? Because if you are almost feeling a sense of duty and responsibility for your loved ones, but you're trying to do it all on your own without any sort of public systems or support, it can feel very isolating. And it almost
Oh,
feels
yeah.
like I certainly felt like I was in it alone for a long time. Like this is an impossible choice and this is an impossible process. And I'm failing. I felt like I was failing when I couldn't get my mom her wheelchair covered. I felt like I was failing when the medication expenses were too high. And realistically, what it really is that it's not supposed to be done individually. It's not just about your family. It's a collective issue, and it has a government solution. There needs to be a public solution for it. But I feel like, especially within brown families, we're like taught not to really talk about it or not to really express it. You just kind of do what you have to do, which really isn't sustainable.
That's very interesting. So I completely understand what you're talking about, brown
Mhm.
families and that culture, because I'm a Latina, and I absolutely know, and I have this conversation with my brother all the time. I live in New York, he lives in London, our parents are in El Salvador.
Mhm.
And we have that conversation. Okay, so who's gonna go back?
Yep.
Right? Who's gonna be there for them? Or what are we going to do? Because it is our responsibility. It is a value that is ingrained since you're tiny.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. It's interesting the way you're positioning it as like, yeah, there's a it's a policy issue too. There's a government solution. There's other ways that need to support the caregivers.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
Go, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, like, that's actually something that Caring Across has been really navigating. I think the narrative work around care is a new intentional landscape. There's been policy work for sure, and I think we're making progress in the advocacy space for care. I think the executive order that Biden just released is
Mhm.
a pretty key example of how systemic shifts are evolving. But there is a cultural gap between how isolated caregivers feel and how common the caregiving experience actually is. Sharing our stories at the dinner table and in the workplace and on public platforms like this one actually kind of help normalize care, and the people who do it and operates as like a support system for folks who do it. We need to visibilize these stories and these narratives and get them at the front so that folks feel like they're not alone, and that they
Mhm.
also understand that it's not just about family. It's not an individual responsibility. It is something that needs a greater, it has a greater demand and a greater solution there.
So I want to talk about two different things. You just mentioned the executive order. Do you
Hmm.
want to could you share a little bit about what happened just for our audience to, kind of I don't know if everyone's been paying attention. So just
Yeah.
to put that out there.
Yes. So the executive order that Biden released, I want to say almost 2 weeks ago, right? Wow. So
I
he
know.
released the largest slate of executive actions that any administration has taken to support care workers, family caregivers, and make care more affordable and accessible for families. He did this in a suite of, I think it's like more than 50 directives that cover things like job quality for childcare workers, quality of jobs for long term services and supports home care workers. There were pieces in there that focus directly on home and community based services like in home supports for veterans, for indigenous communities, and center developments. Like, there were so many things in there that really pointed to a key line that was, we need to invest in care. Care is a
Mm.
priority, and care is the work that makes all of the work possible, is the backbone of our economy, and we need to prioritize it. So the executive order was a monumental step in the right direction for how we talk about care publicly as a piece of infrastructure and a systemic solution.
It's interesting that, it is a major piece of legislation. So it's a major piece of information that's coming out. That's taken a long, 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 long time.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have been here for decades fighting.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
I guess it's good to see progress in the right direction. Sometimes I'm of the mindset that I get a little bit annoyed when it's not coming fast enough, but it is good
Mhm.
to see progress in the right direction.
I think the pandemic really shone a light on how much our care infrastructure fails most Americans, and especially folks who are Black and Brown. Like, caregiving responsibilities disproportionately fell on women. They fall predominantly on, are really the center of impact for folks, or really Black and Brown women in particular. Women, especially women of color, have long been the cornerstone of care in our families and the communities and country. And the pandemic really unveiled that, it heightened it. There were like
Mm.
2 million people just in like 2020 alone, 2 million women who left the labor force entirely because they had to care for their loved ones. And yes, COVID kind of highlighted it, but it also undid decades of progress for women's labor participation, really
Yep.
jeopardizing family economic security and then increasing the racial wealth gap. Like COVID showed us a moment, but then also did it broke like just intense damage. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think that the progress that we're making in the public investments in childcare and paid leave and home and community based services are in part due to that COVID highlight and breakthrough. Um, but it's been going on long before the pandemic.
It's interesting, like what you're saying is so true. COVID put a spotlight on lots of issues, but it
Mhm.
also destroyed so many things.
Yes, yes, it did.
It's oof.
It did. Like even if you think about again looking at the COVID pandemic's implication on the economy. Like care costs are at an all-time high because of inflation and decades of like severe underfunding. So we were already dealing with fractured systems that got exacerbated by the pandemic, and then you add inflation on top of that. And I know, and we know, especially at Carrying Across, that if electeds, no matter the party, don't actually invest in paid leave, childcare, care programs that actually enable aging adults and disabled people to live at home, then we're just going to continue to suffer. Millions
Yep.
of us are just going to continue to struggle to actually do what matters most to so many families, which is care for the people that we love. So it's kind of like you're again getting that narrative, that drumbeat of like caregiving and individual responsibility, families take care of your own. But like the pandemic really said, like it is impossible to do that. It is not something that can be done individually. It has to be systemic. So we really need to address these care needs. And by doing that, by putting those investments, those public investments, they're going to help kind of lower out of pocket costs and shorten waiting lists for all of those services that we need and really allow caregivers like me to actually take time away from work without having to quit. I know that when my mom had her heart attack, I sent a message to my supervisor and I was like, I'm really struggling. And in the same breath as she was like, "Oh yeah, like that's so unfortunate. I'm so sorry that your mom is sick. We have this report due. Are you going to be able to do it?" Without clear policy structures, we're not going to create sustainable change. So we need to ensure that we make this future better. And it's us just trying to kind of care for ourselves in our family situations are not actually going to move it forward. It needs to happen at the public policy level.
I'm so glad you told that short little story of
Yeah.
just how your supervisor reacted, because one of the questions I had for you is, okay, we're looking to the government for policies. Is there a role for companies and business within
Mhm.
this as well?
Mhm. Absolutely. The answer is yes. Create so yes, there's many different opportunities for business leaders to get involved. One way is to model the world that you want to live in, right? To understand that caregivers are such a significant part of the workforce that by supporting caregivers, you're actually supporting your economy, you're supporting your workforce. So part of it is having robust paid leave policies, having flexible opportunities or, care supports for your caregivers like, childcare supplements, but also to really meet the demand, right? To be bold and to be join the vision of a a caring future. Part of that means that business leaders are going to have to take public stance on care as a priority for their business and for the economy. And when we have business leaders that speak publicly about the investments that are needed for care, elected officials listen. So, leveraging your power both inside your organization through your internal policies and operations, and then also using your voice externally and leveraging the power that way as well.
It's not a one or, it's a collective
It
and.
it's always everything.
Yeah.
It's always, folks are like, "Well, if you could pick one." And this is actually what, happened in the care sector for a while, was that public officials will kind of say, well, which one's the most important? Like, is it long term
Mhm.
services? Is it paid leave? Is it early childhood? And it's like, no, everything is important because without one of the pillars of care, without one of those pieces like paid leave or home based and community services or childcare, without one of them, they all kind of crumble. I think about how in that moment when I mentioned my daughter was 6 months old, and my mom was the person who was her primary caregiver, taking care of her while I was at work. And then my mom had a heart attack. In that
Mhm.
very moment, I needed access to quality childcare. I needed access to paid leave because my employer told me that because I had just had a child, I wasn't eligible for another round of paid leave to take care of my mother. And I
Okay.
needed long-term services and supports because my mother wanted to heal at home. She wanted to age at home and she didn't want to go into an institution. So without home and community-based services, paid leave, and early childhood care, I could not function. And I am not a unique case. There are millions of people like me every single day who are faced with impossible choices because there aren't enough public investments because there aren't enough sustainable solutions that are policy driven.
So policy needs to change, businesses need to put in, and individuals need to change the narrative.
Hmm.
I would say. I actually wanted to talk about that because I remember the first time I talked to you and your team about mobilize women.
Hmm.
I remember something that stuck with me from that conversation was, I think I used the term caregiving burden for something.
Mm.
And your team quickly was like, we're trying to change the narrative, which I thought was so great. But can you talk a little bit, because we had a very short kind of conversation about it on that call, but I would really like to share that with our listeners, because it's very interesting to me of like, as individuals we are contributing to the narrative,
Hmm.
and if we want things to change, how are we changing them? How do we talk about things? What are the things that we can do?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer it probably in a couple of different ways. I think
Yes,
there's
please.
a couple of so the first way to not talk about burden is to
Hmm.
actually talk about choice. That it is about choice and opportunity. So, for example, like a quarter of employed mothers have to return back to work within like 2 weeks of giving birth. Um, and I think like somewhere around like 20% of retirees actually like leave the workforce earlier to take care of a family member who was facing a chronic condition or illness. So, like, that is because of a lack of options and choices around the decisions that facilitate their work and their livelihood, right? So when people can actually make decisions about their own reproductive health care, about whether or not they want to have children, about whether or not they want to care for a family member or how they want to receive care, they have more control over their own economic security. And that what is at stake is a life of our choosing. And that whether or not we can afford to raise a family if we choose to, whether or not we can care
Hmm.
for our loved ones, ensure we have time off for our own health needs, all of that is based off of choices, which are only possible if we have the systemic support. So no person is actually a burden. The lack of
Right.
supports is the problem. And the lack of supports is what diminishes our choice. And that is the issue. So we don't like framing the idea of a burden because that places again individual responsibility. It's a weight that you're carrying. That's actually not the case. The weight is the lack of choice. So that's kind of, my
I
take on it.
Yeah, and I think it's a great take. It's interesting to think about that as, it is a lack of choice. It is. I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of like, can I, as a single woman living in New York City, can I afford to have kids?
Mhm.
And honestly, I don't really even have a choice.
Yeah, see? Choices. I'm telling you, this is it. This is all that I think if we come down to it, that's what Carrying Across is really working towards, is to create a world where there are options, where you can choose how you age. You can choose how you age with dignity and how you live with the values that are aligned with your own desires. And that we have to be in a position where we have those options available to us. Caregiving in this country, like broadly, has really been undervalued and underpaid, and it all really stems from historically racist patriarchal structures,
Yep.
which reach back to our nation's founding. That
As as
caregiving,
as about everything
yes,
goes back.
yes, everything points back to slavery. This is like if I could, this would be the book that I write. It all points back to slavery. And
Yes,
I think,
please do that.
yeah, that's it. The caregiving was valued, it was undervalued because it was viewed as
Right.
work of enslaved Black women. And America has carried that drumbeat of lack of care and the devaluation of care tied to those roots. And when we look at the folks that are disproportionately impacted, they're Black and Brown women. And again, how is public policy showing up for Black and Brown women? It's not. So this is the time. This
Mm-mm.
is how we shift it. We have to provide options and choices, and really invest in care for all of us.
Yeah. And I'm gonna put this hat on for a moment of
Hmm.
like we've talked while we were talking about the pandemic, you said, the women's labor participation, and it's true. Let's
Hmm.
let's call it like it is. Caregiving primarily lands on women. But I know I will have people tell me, but like what about dads and what about men and uh, how are we bringing this conversation along for everyone?
Hmm. Yeah, so
Cuz
that's why I said it's about care for us all, right? Because
right.
truly, what we focus on is creating solutions that will work for folks at the very center of impact. But when you
Mhm.
solve for a Black, disabled, immigrant woman who is sandwich caregiving, you solve for everyone. Because if
Yeah.
it works for that person, it'll work for everyone. And that's
I
kind of why we center that solution.
Yeah, I can agree more. I think you yes.
Yeah. But I think that that's also a narrative that's been really interesting and dominating our society, is the that care falls on women, and that women are the ones that have to do the caregiving. Again, choice, right? Like, so during the pandemic, my husband and I ran a bunch of numbers. He was unemployed because he had a very public like job, so he wasn't able to work. And I worked from home, so I was able to kind of continue working. And my daughter wasn't able to go to school, so he ended up becoming a full time stay at home parent. And as the primary caregiver for our daughter, he was like, I'm never going back. Like, he's like, let's figure this out. Let's figure out how to make me the stay at home parent and how to do that
Mhm.
long term. And again, I think one, there's a narrative that it's an expectation for women to do it. We need to cut that narrative down. And we also need to provide choices and options. I think about the long term implications of him being a stay at home parent. I think about the fact that he's missing, for example, like Social Security. Like
Yeah.
these are key core working years that he is not going to have counted towards a Social Security. And what does that mean for folks long term? So these are all the things that we have to solve for. And yeah, it impacts my husband, and he's a guy, and everybody cares at some point in their life, and I think we need to visibilize all of it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
What can we do to move the needle, like as individuals?
Ah, okay. There's a couple of things. The first is talk to your loved ones about care. Don't make it a thing that like springs up on you and then you're like, "What? What do you mean?" Talk to your loved ones about how they would want to be cared for if anything were to happen. Do they want to be cared for at home? Would they prefer an institution? What kind of institution would they prefer? Like have those conversations and really visibilize your abilities and what you're able to do for them, so that if you do have a moment where you're entering a care crisis, it is just a little bit, you have a little bit more guidance around it for your own loved ones' desires. One thing I want to think about, like, although women do continue to shoulder the majority of family caregiving responsibilities, that like only like 40% of of the, I think like 53 million family caregivers in the US are men. So I also wanted to like, let's like normalize care and just be
Yeah.
really really out front about it. Like let's get on the streets and scream it. And that is another call to action, is that every single action you take, every petition you sign that focuses on care, every time you use your voice to do a call in to your elected official, to show up at an event, to anything that you can do that supports the drumbeat of care is so important. To find organizations that you really value and trust and to get behind them and get behind what they're doing and be a part of the movement is so critical. So, talk about family caregiving, talk about care, talk about it at the dinner table, talk about it in the streets, talk about it casually at work, talk about it all the time to make it front and center. Show that it is a priority to you in the way that we format policies by moving petitions and calls to actions and doing anything you can to make sure that it's a part of your civic action and engagement, and support organizations like mine. Those are the things that I would say that really, really I would push to.
I mean, those are three things that we can do.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
that hard.
Absolutely.
Awesome. We're going to end with our little lightning round, just to, you know, end on a nice light note.
Mhm.
So, you ready?
Maybe.
If you could time travel, where is the first place you would go?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I know that I should have been prepared for this, but I always don't have an answer for this question. I would actually say the 1990s because that was where I think a lot of brilliant minds and brilliant actions that the start of the new revolution kind of
Mm,
spurred from. I have a hard time going past anything beyond the early 1900s just because as a black person it'd be hard to navigate. So I'm going to go with the
yeah.
1990s because that's my safe space.
I like it. I always like to see if people would go back or forward. And I like your stay, like I'd go back, but not that back.
Not that back. Yeah, just a little.
um, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
The ability to see multiple outcomes at one time and then pick
Ah,
the best outcome.
I like that. I never heard that. I like that. Favorite mythical creature?
Oh my gosh. I have to say unicorn, but my daughter has me thinking that unicorns are real. So I don't know.
I'm with her. I want to live in a world where unicorns are real.
She's
So,
really got me convinced. She's like talking about dinosaurs and how, dinosaurs don't really exist now, but you know that they existed before. So she's almost got
yeah.
me bought in on the unicorns are just extinct.
That's also very sad.
Yeah.
If your house caught on fire, what's the first object you would run to save?
My laptop, which shows
Ooh,
how dedicated to my work I am. It's
yeah,
terrible.
that's dedication. What's a skill you wish you had?
Oh my gosh, the ability to replicate, but that's a superpower. I don't know if that's a skill. I wanna, like, kind of partially clone multiple parts of me.
I'll allow it. Two superpowers.
Oh, yeah, 2 superpowers. My skill is a power.
Favorite recent read?
Oh my goodness. I am reading In Every Mirror She's Black. I read a lot of like essay collection books and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I think that there's also Phoebe Robinson's Please Don't Sit on My Bed in Your Outside Clothes, which has a very humor filled approach to the black women experience.
Ooh, I love that. I'll check those out. And finally, what's one thought you'd want to leave with our listeners?
Everyone is touched by care. And I urge you to be a leader in your own care narrative.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Sade, it's been wonderful to talk to you, and I can't wait to continue the conversation at Mobilize Women.
Yes, I'm so excited. This is giving me even more food for thought for the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
We're back.
We're back.
I cannot wait for that panel. Sade is fantastic, and I cannot even imagine how great it will be when we have Reshma Saujani on the stage with her as well, who is the founder of Girls Who Code and also formerly the Marshall Plan for Moms, now Moms First. But Reshma's going to be on that panel. Sade, Francois Mathieu, who's the executive director of Tend Academy. She's a psychotherapist. She's really, really cool. Jacqueline Howard, senior diversity recruiter for RBC Wealth Management, will kick off the panel. And then Robert Espinosa, who is the executive vice president of policy at PHI, will lead the discussion with Francois, Reshma, and Sade. And I think it'll be fantastic.
We talked briefly at the beginning of the episode about our history makers in terms of our new history makers award, which came from these amazing history makers we've been reading every week for so long now. We ready to get into some history makers?
Of course.
Yeah. Alrighty. I will start you off. Rayana Barnawi became the first Saudi Arabian woman to go to space.
Very cool. I'm actually very excited that I get to talk about Missy Elliott, who I was a huge fan of and who became the first female hip hop artist inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I will tell you, I originally had Missy Elliott, like I the way that I had them ordered for each one of us to read, I had Missy Elliott's first, and then I was like, you know what? She's more Maricella's generation. I'm gonna let Maricella read
I
this
was a
one.
massive fan.
Yeah. Cristal Spain became the first Black woman to lead the South Carolina Democratic Party.
Wenda Fong became the first Asian American chair of the California State University Board of Trustees.
Donna Deegan became the first woman mayor of Jacksonville, Florida.
Kwanzaa Jones became the first Black woman to have a Princeton building named after her. That's really cool.
It is really cool.
So those are our history makers for this week. Don't miss out on Megan's podcast every Friday with history makers. It's really cool. She's doing a great job. Megan, you are doing a great job. They're very, very cool. These episodes, I've been actually quite enjoying them. So
Excellent.
thank you for
Thank
doing
you.
that. And next week, we continue our showcase of Mobilize Women speakers, this time with Rita J. King. She's the EVP for Business Development at Science House. She's a futurist, which is really, really cool. She works with senior leaders and their organizations to close the gap between strategy and execution for better results with less stress. We talk about AI, we talk about technology, we talk about inclusion as the world is changing. She's really, really, really cool. And actually, it was after my conversation with her taping this podcast that I was like, you absolutely need to be part of Mobilize Women. And I'm so happy she said yes, because that session that she will be on, which is getting future proofed, is going to be fantastic. We have some really cool speakers there as well. So
Yeah, she was the reverse. When we reached out to Ramitha and Sade once they were, already confirmed for Mobilize Women. We were like, "Do you want to be on the podcast? Because we just want to share your story. We think you're so fascinating." Like, and we have some other Mobilize Women guests coming up who scheduling didn't quite work out where they were able to record before, but they're going to record afterwards. So keep an eye out for them. But Rita was one that Maricella reached out to me like right after I had scheduled a podcast. She said, "Yeah, I invited her to be on Mobilize Women. She's amazing."
she's really, really cool. So please tune in next week so you can hear my conversation with Rita. And have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, see you then.
Bye.
Ellevate Network drives real results for ambitious women trying to break through the glass ceiling and achieve success in their careers. We offer a platform full of resources and opportunities for growth, all designed to help you unlock your potential. With Ellevate support, you can take the first step toward achieving your professional goals. With a supportive community and tangible resources at your fingertips, you're only one step away from reaching your fullest potential. Join us today and take advantage of our 30-day free trial to start building the career of your dreams. Thanks so much for listening to the Ellevate podcast. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, give us 5 stars, and share your review. You can learn all about Ellevate membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Katherine Heller. She rocks. Thanks so much, and join us next week.